Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Group CEO of Elpet Global, and I am delighted to have with us today Vikram Agarwal. Vikram has been a supply chain expert and professional for more than 35 years across the globe, has had the opportunity to work at leading companies like Unilever, Avon, Dole, and several PE funds. And since January 2022, he is the Chief Operations Officer of Danone, where he's driving a wide-ranging transformation across the Danone end-to-end supply chain. Vikram, it's a pleasure to have you today. Thanks for the time and welcome.
Thank you, Radu, and very glad to be here, of course.
Super. Now, first and foremost, let's start about yourself and your career. When you look back, what were some of the key inflection points and how did they help you understand the role of supply chain in order to create a competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think before going on to inflection points, Radu, what I would really like to share is that I feel I've been privileged in my career. I've been privileged to work in different parts of the world, which has enabled me to get a very good understanding of how to relate to different cultures and how people's minds work in different parts of the world, in a very international sort of a way. And secondly, I've also been privileged that at least for the next last 20 years, if not before that, I've always worked in multifunctional business teams as the supply chain person, but as part of a multifunctional business teams. And that has really enabled me to grasp better as to what is really the role of supply chains in furthering the interest of the business. Yeah. And we did that book together, which was on source to sold, and I think I've talked about it here there also about what is some of the this stuff which I've learned. But I think if I just go back to the inflection points which you're saying, and I think the first one for me was that I was in the factories. I spent the first 15 years of my career in growing up in factories, and my last role over there was the factory director of a few multiple factories in a cluster. And as you know, a factory director operates very strongly with a chain and command kind of a leadership style. It has to, because that is the way a factory is structured. And then suddenly from there, I moved to a regional role, which was more of a staff role. And there was nobody except me and my laptop to do that job. And then I learned in that it was very uncomfortable in the beginning, moving from a very structured factory setup to understanding how I can deliver value in a staff role. And then I learned over there that what could be really how you could influence people and how you could get them onboarded with your with what you want to drive. And of course, the key learning which came out of that was that more than any rank or any chair which you're sitting on, it's the merit of what you say, which enables you to get traction in the company. So I think that was the first one, which sort of then enabled me to influence things in a much better and a much more uh, uh, influenced and a merit-based manner than authority-based manner. The second one, which I would say, is when we started a project many years ago on a backward integration project on palm oil derivatives in Indonesia. When I started looking at the project, I was leading procurement for Asia Africa at that time. I was merely looking at it from point of view of delivering some savings. How can I backward integrate and do something and which will help me capture the supplier's margins and I will save some money. But as I got into that project and as I started consulting more and more people from the business and my colleagues in R&D, then I realized that this is actually a growth project. And the reason it is a growth project is that by backward integrating and getting the technology in-house gives my colleagues in R&D the liberty to experiment with the ingredients that would produce and use that for delivering superior benefits in the finished products to the consumers, which is an angle which I hadn't realized. So that business which I had set up in when was it now? It was 2011 is a roaring business now, very successful. Successful not in terms of just the cost value which it has delivered, but successful in putting products in the market which are far more differentiated than any competition. Maybe that's something which plays to your question of how do you create business value in the supply chain. And the third one, which I would take, is a more recent one in Danone. Over the last 2 years, we have been able to improve our customer service level by 500 bips and still improving in terms of our customer fill rate. Immediately does translate, or a part of it translates into volume growth, because essentially you are delivering to the shelf faster and you're delivering it in time. You're not allowing the shelf to run dry, so you're selling more, very simply speaking. Well, it doesn't mean if you improve by 5%, it is 8% volume growth, because there are stocks in between also. Yeah, but whatever empirical correlation you can use, all that I would say is that it definitely has contributed to the turnaround in volume growth, which Danone has seen over the last 2 to 3 years.
Mm. And talking about the book, I remember that the distillation of your chapter, there were a couple of memorable quotes, and I've shared a few times actually in different keynotes. The one that really struck me, you said that it ultimately boils down to two things, and if I can just kindly summarize a little bit what you said as well, is like value creation. So supply chain is about value creation. How do you bring value? It's not about optimization and so on, but ultimately, how does that translate to business value? Second thing that you said is about authentic leadership, and how do you drive the teams in an authentic way. I love that you're embodiment
Yeah,
of that.
you actually stolen my thunder by saying that, because I was going to repeat the same two later on. Yeah,
But I'm
it's
putting a
okay.
plug for the book, so I'm just say
Yes,
whoever's listening, get the book if you haven't already.
yes.
But I also wanted to stress perhaps there's also coincidence to a certain extent, maybe not so coincidence. So you took over in Danone at the beginning of 2022. Since then, there's been 10 quarters. There's been 10 quarters in which Danone has beaten both top and bottom line consensus estimates, which is incredible and fantastic for the company. And maybe just to give a flavor for the audience of the complexity and magnitude of the supply chain that you're managing, maybe tell us a little bit, how is the Danone supply chain structured and what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a very vast supply chain, Radu, with in-country presence in 35 countries around the world, and then additional 20 countries where we do business on an offshore basis. There are out of 100,000 people who are there in Danone employees, half of them are in operations. So 48,000 to be precise work in operations, which of course includes the factories and some part of distribution and so on. We have a huge network of suppliers, which is 50,000 suppliers and key partners all around the world. We have 150 production sites, again, all around the world, with a concentration in Europe and in the US, but nevertheless also in countries like Indonesia, yeah, and Mexico. Yeah. We have got more than 300 distribution centers, yeah, usually operated by 3PLs or 4PLs. We serve 1.5 billion customers. We produce and we ship 35 million tons of products every year, branded consumer goods, which in terms of volume would make us one of the largest in the foods industry. And we also operate one of the largest chilled supply chains in the world, basically for our dairy business.
Yeah.
So we operate across three big categories. One is the essential dairy and plant-based. Both go together. We put them together because there is a lot of people who are flexitarians. And the second one is waters, yeah, which is a combination of plain waters like Evian, like Volvic, like Aqua in Indonesia, as also functional waters like Mizone in China. Yeah. And then the third category, which actually is people don't generally associate with Danone, but that is nearly a third of the company, is on specialized nutrition, where we operate on infant milk formula, adult nutrition, and pediatric specialties. What really inspires me about working in Danone is how we link business performance with an external responsibility. Corporations have a dual purpose. They have a purpose for economic growth, but they also have a purpose for being good to the environment and being good to the society and doing things which help people become healthier, doing things which make the planet a better place to live in. And that is why it is also embedded in our motto, which just says very simply, one planet, one health. And that is really what inspires us, which drives all of us, not just me, into putting out products over there which make people healthier and which come at a minimum impact on the environment from the resources that we draw from it.
And on the topic of, so half the organization is, half of Danone is in operations, is in supply chain, is making, moving product. Now, how do you think in terms of business growth and enabling that business growth from it, where you sit as the chief operations officer?
Yeah, so I think so. First of all, uh, any strategy that we prepare, which we have in operations, has to be intrinsically linked to the company strategy or the business strategy. And our guiding principle over there is the Renew Danone strategy, which Antoine launched soon after he had taken this over as the CEO. And it's actually very simple. It's about winning where we are and then expanding ourselves into areas where we have the right to win. It's about managing a portfolio, and it's basically a very very simple growth oriented strategy. So moving from there, we have the operation strategy, which is closely linked onto that. And so far, so what is our goal? Our goal is really to drive greater impact on the business through the supply chain, drive excellence, drive efficiency, and make ourselves more sustainable throughout our end-to-end supply chain. Yeah, not alone, not just alone, but with our ecosystem of partners. Yeah. So far, this has led to a relentless focus on customer service. We have made strategic investments on capacity creation. We have stepped up our cost productivity level to where I believe that we are in the top 10 percentile of the industry. We used to be till 2 3 years ago. Let's call it the bottom 50 percentile. So that's really enabled us to move and generate more fuel of growth. We have improved the gross margins, enabling more investment behind the brands, which in turn generates more volume growth, which in turn reduces your fixed cost base. So we've been able to catalyze that virtuous circle of growth, as people often refer to it. You reduce your cost structure, you expand your gross margins, you put more money in your A&P, you grow the brands, you get the benefit in terms of volume growth, and then the whole circle keeps repeating itself virtuously. So I do believe that we have been critical catalysts in putting the company into that virtuous scale of growth. Now, and how have we done it? I think first and foremost is what I call the 4 C's. Yeah. The first C is about cost competitiveness. Yeah. Both the words are important, cost and competitiveness. Yeah. Second one is around cash. The third one is around customer service. Well, it's not necessarily in the order of importance, but I'll talk about customer service a bit later again. So third one is around customer service, and the fourth one is around carbon.
Mm,
So customer service, cost, cash, and carbon.
yes.
Now, if you ask any of my peers in the industry, anybody who's in a equivalent position in the supply chain, probably they will all talk about the same thing. Yeah, in slightly different words, and maybe there'll be somebody will talk about 3 C's, somebody will talk about 5 C's or 5 S's. It doesn't matter. It's essentially the same things that all of us are working towards in operations and supply chain. The trick is how widely and how deeply and how quickly do you deploy it in the organization. Yeah.
Yes.
And that is where I believe that we have had a contribution to make in terms of impact. I mean, 2.5 years, 10 quarters is not a very long time in the lifespan of a supply chain which is so vast. So where I really feel good about and proud of my team is that how they have in such a short period of time been able to deploy these 4 C's with a completely discontinuous performance benefit coming in across in all of them. Yeah.
So I'll want to double click on this, but before, and I think this is important also for the leaders that are following us in this discussion, because there's always a balance in between short and long term. So my question that I want to ask you is, now you're 2.5 years in. When you started in Danone, looking back, there's always that get instant and or quick quick wins, whilst at the same time look at the long term and look at, kind of draft the vision of where the organization is going. Are there certain specifics? Are there certain tips and tricks? Are there certain, success recipes to maintain this balance? Were there certain things that you did maybe early on in this journey that set you up to the point where you are today, where you can say, look, this has been successful, 10 quarters of,
Yeah,
beating estimates?
yeah. I think so. What you decide to do in the supply chain, at least in the short term, has to be very aligned to where the business is facing a challenge in the short term. So specifically in the context of Danone, when I joined, 22 was a year of very high inflation, and the world was also just coming out of COVID, and there were multiple disruptions, like the war in Ukraine and the sea freight crisis and so on. So it was having two effects: one, very high inflation; second, disruption in supplies. That is why, in the short term, we said, okay, forget about everything else for now. Let's give ourselves 1 year to just fix these two. Because if we don't fix these two, we will never earn for ourselves the license to invest for ourselves for the future. Yeah. And that is why in that year, in 22 itself, with inflation being at an all-time high, especially in Europe, we also went an all-time high on cost productivity. We also went from a huge benefit on customer service, which was not just about making sure that there is a customer order and you supply to it more in a more agile manner, but it was quite structural because we started going into tier two and tier three suppliers to ensure that we safeguard our supplies much, much more upstream than from our own factory alone. The problem which was happening in 22, it's not so. For example, if there is a packaging supplier, he's not able to supply packaging, not because he doesn't have the capacity, but he's not getting the aluminum foil which goes into that packaging. Why is the aluminum foil supplier not being able to supply? Well, he's not getting the aluminum ingots. Why is he not getting the aluminum ingots? So, like that, we had to trace it back and say where really is the pinch point to bring it back. So, I think that's my answer to the first part of your question on short term. But at the same time, if you just keep managing the short term all the time, because supply chains will always have some disruption somewhere or the other. Yeah, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. Uh, we deal with a world which is becoming increasingly VUCA. We deal with the economic policies by countries being changed every other day. Uh, so at the same time, we took stock of the situation and started investing in long-term initiatives such as digitalization of operations, which is something which we are quite advanced with now. We started late. We started this 2 years ago, but I think we have managed to get the benefit of all the learnings in the industry and leapfrog many things by doing that. We started understanding on decarbonization of the supply chain. So like that, not just managing the immediate, we started putting capacities which stimulate growth, and I'll come back to that in a little bit of in a bit of time. So we were therefore not just rising up to the business challenge, but at the same time, we were also investing in our future. If we stop doing that, then year to year, you will just be continue fighting. What you see are the adverse challenges developing in a macroeconomic environment.
Now, a little bit back to the four C's, and perhaps I'll just go and emphasize a little bit on the C that has to do with customer centricity, which is perhaps the one that, my observation from where I sit as a consultant, as a headhunter, a lot of supply chain professionals forget. Do tell us, how are you working with your organization to ensure that customer centricity is touched upon, is improved constantly?
Yeah, I think firstly, it's a very simple thing about just making sure that you respond to the customer as the end-to-end supply chain. You're able to work with the customers collaboratively to forecast the demand better. You're able to plan your inventories to that forecast, and you're able to plan your production to that inventory, and you're able to plan your suppliers into materials to that production schedule. So I think it's first of all about making the whole end-to-end supply chain sync together in a synchronized way. Yeah, I mean, it may sound simplistic, but a number of times, this when this does get broken, it takes a lot of time to start fixing it. Yeah. Secondly, it is to understand that it is not just enough to be delivering to a customer orders, and people talk about 90% customer fill rate, 95%, and all that. That's great. And that is the fundamental foundation that you must get it into the high 90s. But more than that is the responsiveness. What is the flexibility that you are giving the customer to be able to supply in a more agile manner? So if I'm a customer and if I find that I need to change the order which I gave you yesterday today to something else, am I enabling that or am I blocking that? So that is what I would call responsiveness to demand, because a number of times the retailer also has a challenge in being able to predict the demand, because demand is from the consumer and from the shopper. So therefore, being able to respond to that and respond to that with speed. I think if you just take customer centricity in that sense, it is much bigger than just case fill rate. It is about understanding the business of your customer and enabling them where it matters the most. Yeah. The second one, which I talked about, is the cost advantage. One is about, and this is about really being able to manage the cost of goods sold or COGS in a dynamic way, being able to forecast that in a ongoing rolling basis. That is important because, let's say, if there is an inflation in commodities, then that hits everybody. Yeah. It's not Danone alone who will be hit by that, it hits everybody. But it is the agility and the dynamism with which you manage the impact of that into the business. If required, by taking pricing decisions in time, if required, by managing your mix to maximize the margins. So I think that is one dimension which is about overall COGS management. Now, within that comes the role of cost savings or productivity, yeah, which is basically to say that, have I been able to offset the impact of inflation more than anybody else has? And that's why the cost competitiveness plays such a big role, because that is what drives the competitiveness in the whole COGS equation. The third one is about cash. And cash, of course, as all of us know, fuels our growth. And to strengthen our short term financial performance, we in operations are focused around three or four things, which is where we have a major impact on the company's cash. First is, of course, the profitability, where we have a role by way of managing the COGS very effectively. Second is the working capital, particularly the inventory that we are managing, making sure that we don't have less inventory or more inventory, but we have the right inventory. Yeah. Third one is is making sure that the accounts payable to our suppliers are balanced in a way that we are paying them in a way that it matches their cash flow. Yeah, it's neither under nor over. So resetting the payables to a level whereby there is equilibrium between us and our suppliers on this. And the third one, of course, is investing lean and investing in high efficiency assets to meet the growth of the business, capex namely, and capex is cash, as we know. I think if I come to the last one, then carbon reduction. This is about pioneering sustainability through a very closely defined set of KPIs, which we have embodied in what we call the Danone Impact Journey. And that is really a muscle which we believe we have developed very well. It's more in the last 1 year that that has taken shape, but I think that we have a very, very good understanding on how to decarbonize the supply chain, not just in scope 1 and 2, which is our own factories, which everybody does, but also on scope 3, particularly on regenerative agriculture with our farmers.
And I saw the programs that you're doing with your farmers, which are quite
Yeah.
noteworthy and incredible. I saw the latest that you did in I think there was a clip also in Iberia, and it was I quite
Yes.
followed the farms in Iberia. Now, I'll want to ask you more on this sustainability front, on the carbon reduction front specifically in a moment. Before I ask you that though, I also wanted to plug what you just said at the very beginning, when you mentioned that ultimately customer centricity can only be achieved if you have an end-to-end supply chain, and if your teams operate from an end to end. That's, in the book we talk about the chain model, and H stands for holistic. My impression is that that's again and linked to how much does the supply chain executives have access and direct communication, or even interaction with the clients. In FMCG, clearly that's closer. In other industries is a little bit backwards or at the back of the room. But if you enable that exposure to the clients, if your teams operate from a truly end-to-end perspective, then basically you achieve this magic that you have on the customer centricity side. And I wanted just to double click that, because even in today's world, a lot of companies and in certain industries are fairly disconnected or disjointed. And maybe I'll pause for a second to see if you have any reaction to that, and then we go back to the carbon discussion.
Yeah, so, certainly, Radu. And I think if I'll build on that, I do believe, and we do it all the time, that our offering to the customer is not just a commercial proposition that I give you this product and I give you this margin, and then off we go and we sign a deal. I think it has to be enlarged into a more value based offering. It is not just a commercial agreement, but it is also what I can deliver to you in terms of service. It is also how I can help you reduce your inventory. Yeah. It is also how I can help you reduce your distribution and logistics cost. So, really, I look at it as something which has to be given to the customer as a full value offering rather than just a commercial proposition. And in order to achieve that, it's not therefore just the remit of the salespeople in the organization to be doing that. The supply chain person, the customer service part of the supply chain has to be there into those discussions, just to make sure that the totality of what you're offering is being appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole end-to-end piece, to my mind, starts from there. A consumer goods industry is about pull, it's not about push. Yeah. So when you have that customer relationship, then you know that what you need to produce and how you need to produce and where and in what quantity. Yeah. So it all starts from that front end being the pull. But then it's easier said than done, because then you have to manage the agility in the factory production. You will get swings where the factory may be 100% utilized in a particular month, and it may drop down to 40% utilization. So those are all things that you have to optimize as you model the supply chain. But again, staying on the topic a little bit more on that, is that if I expand the definition of customer service beyond just delivering the product to them, we in operations are also responsible of making sure that we land any innovations right first time with our consumers, with our customers. And to my mind, that is also customer service. It's a customer service that if a normal a new innovation was going to take 2 years to land in the shelf, you've been able to get it right first time and in 1 year's time, for example. To my mind, that's also customer service, because then the customer has a new product on the shelf, it attracts the consumers buy more, and everybody gets economic benefit out of that. Yeah. And the third one, which I will say, is about creating capacity in a way that you're not necessarily just following demand, which is what most of us do in the supply chain. We see what is the demand forecast and we plan our capacities to that. But I always like to put a slightly different dimension on that. How can capacity creation stimulate demand? So if you have got a country somewhere in Africa which is currently importing the products from Europe, and it takes order to deliver is, let's say, 4 months in that case. And if I go onshore over there and create the capacity, apart from cost savings, it should also trigger off top line growth, because now you don't have to plan your business 4 to 6 months in advance. You can do whatever you want instantly in a matter of weeks. So I think looking at capacity creation, not just as a purely demand supply equation, but also a top line growth enabler, is a very different dimension when you start thinking of it that way.
Yeah, no, but that's a paradigm shift. And again, I mean, all of these things, and I love all these points that you're making, come from a mindset of how can I ultimately serve my client better, and what can I do? And you mentioned also those things. I mean, indeed, if your R&D and if your research takes 12 months instead of 24 months, the narrow definition of customer centricity cannot only be, okay, the on-time delivery or whatever else, right? It cannot only be restricted to that, but ultimately, are you making your client's life easier, better, cheaper, whatever those parameters are? Then you are basically customer focused, and you're enabling customer centricity.
Yeah.
Now, on the sustainability front, I just want to bring it and to get some more examples, because I think you've done actually quite a lot in the last two and a half years on the carbon reduction. So maybe if you want to share some more snippets, that would be great.
Yeah, I think so. Firstly, it's about scope one and two. And if I look at the scope one and two emissions, which is basically coming from our own factory, we have been able to cut them by 21% over the last 3 or 4 years. And 72% of our electricity is now coming from renewable sources. So that's the first thing on minding your own house. And usually that's the easier one because things are in your control. You decide that you need to invest some capex to be more energy efficient, or more opex, or whatever be the case, and you're able to get it. But I think for us, what has been important with these are big numbers. Getting a 21% reduction in carbon, what that has meant is that we have had to roll out program. We call it a refuel program on a global scale across all our major sites, and then just go through the grind of that in making sure you carry energy audits, and you become more efficient at what you're consuming first of all, and then you look at the source of that energy. The second one, I'll then come to scope 3 flag, as it is called, forest, lands, and agriculture, which is where our initiatives on regenerative agriculture, which I talked about earlier, they come into play. And for us, the principal sphere principal area of activity over there is around milk farmers. Yeah. How do we make milk more sustainable? Yeah. We were the first company to announce that we will reduce the methane emissions coming from the milk supply chain by 30% by 2030. And we could have the confidence to take such a bold uh, uh, commitment because I think we know how to do it. Yeah. We know how to manage the productivity of the cows through the right genome in terms of the cattle hybrids. We know how to manage it better through a balanced feed. We know how to manage it through a better soil management, manure management, and so on. So it's really a 360-degree approach. And you mentioned a farm in Spain, which is the first B Corp certified farm in Europe, and it is 100% dedicated to us. That's an excellent example of how we have been able to bring both the economic benefit to that farm as well as the carbon benefits. It's besides being a B Corp certified farm, it is a farm with one of the lowest footprint of carbon per ton of milk in the world. Yeah.
Mm.
So that's the third one, or second one, which is on scope 3. And the last one is on scope 3 non-flag, as it is called, where comes in things like packaging and logistics. Yeah. And what we do see is that the biggest contribution which can come in logistics is by efficiency, higher truck fill rate, less kilometers. Yeah, the normal stuff which all of us do in logistics optimization. That is the one which may sound simple but offers the biggest potential. And the beauty about this one is that you're not reducing carbon by spending money, you're reducing carbon by saving money. Yeah.
Mm. How about it?
There are a lot of arguments go around saying that reducing carbon is going to cost money, which is correct. It is correct in the case of scope 3, but it is not entirely correct in the case of scope 1 and 2 or in scope 3 logistics. Yeah. And the last one is around packaging, particularly plastics, where we have got big initiatives for greater use of recycled plastics.
Now, you've spoken about a lot of programs, and I must say, just out of this conversation, my head is spinning a little bit that you're doing so many great initiatives. Now, on the topic of people and organization, because ultimately all of this is driven by I think you said, many, many thousands of people within the Danone operations. Any programs and initiatives that stand out for you that you have implemented in terms of building the capabilities, building the skill set of the operations team in Danone to deliver all these great programs?
Yeah, I think when you're, and particularly today, as we sit on an era where we are seeing revolution on many fronts, revolution on consumer awareness around sustainability, about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on, it is absolutely necessary to continue investing in your people through training programs and taking them to this next stage of realization. We call that the DAN skills program. which covers many dimensions. It covers leadership training, but it also covers skill training in areas like AI, digitalization in operations. We have just in the middle of creating a global center for digital manufacturing acceleration, not for executives, but more for line people, where they can come and see that what are the things. So I'm saying when we talk of training, sometimes we tend to concentrate on the leadership levels in the supply chain. But really, when I talk of the 48,000 people in Danone, most of them are sitting in the factories. So you have to create that as a grassroots movements by getting the people into the factories up to the next level of training. Now, you need to do it not just to equip them better for running your business better, but you also need to do it for managing change management. If you do not invest in that, you will automatically find a rejection coming with the shop floor level of any new initiative such as digitalization that you're launching. Yeah. So I think that is super important. We invest a lot behind that. We invest a lot in training, not just our own people, but even our farmers on leading edge farming techniques. Yeah. We send them around to leading farmers like the one in Spain and a couple of them in the USA, is to see that how have they been able to improve the farm economics. So I think that is one area. The second one is that apart from developing your own people, I believe that you do continuously have to refresh the talent pipeline by bringing in some level of externality also. Yeah. You have to bring people who are able to look at what you are doing with a different pair of eyes, who are able to benchmark you with the external world better. If you don't do that, then you have the risk of creating a very inside looking organization. People improve on a year to year basis, but they improve against themselves. They don't necessarily improve against the competition. And that is why bringing in people from outside is also equally important. Of course, there's a balance. You can't go too much this way or too much that way. But as a talent strategy, that is always something that you need to manage in a responsible way. The only other thing which I will add is that we are creating what we call should be the Danone brand of leadership. Yeah. And we want people who are joining us to be in sync with what we want in the Danone brand leadership. We have used amply in creating that framework the concept of ambidexterity. Is that people whom we would want to be in the business in operations are people who are ambidextrous. Now, what does that mean? It means that you have the ability to manage things which are seemingly contradictory at the same time. How can you be caring and demanding at the same time? How can you be doing performance but still do it in a responsible manner for your business that you don't damage the long term to achieve short term results? Yeah. How do you manage growth on one hand and sustainability on the other hand? Yeah. How do you manage the drive? How do you have a very uh, driven mindset, but at the same time you're well informed and fact based? You're not driving just on emotion. You're driving based on facts. Yeah. So I think these are the sort of things which we look at, that when we induct or develop a leader in the organization, the ability to manage these seemingly contradictory thoughts in an ambidextrous manner is very important to us.
I love that. No, I'll steal it. I'll share it onwards. I know the word ambidextrous. I never quite thought about it from an ambidextrous leadership, and it makes a lot of sense. And increasingly, it's a necessity of the world. And that reminds me, just a couple of weeks ago, I had a discussion with a candidate, and I was asking her what was your best leader and what made that person your best leader. And she specifically said that the fact that the leader was able to be both extremely harsh and pushy and always stretching her limits, but at the same time extremely empathetic and understanding. And those two things is not an either or as sometimes we might think, but it can be in a combination. So love that analogy. Final question from me, Vikram. What advice would you give to young supply chain professionals or people just graduating, stepping into the world of supply chain that maybe one day want to sit in your shoes and be the chief operations officers of a great multi-billion dollar company?
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe some of this will be repetitive to you, Radu, because I've talked in the book on source to sold. Is first of all, always see how you're creating business value rather than just supply chain value. A supply chain which works for itself is going to fail. And a supply chain which works in order to generate business value, like some of the examples that we have talked about, is the one which will succeed. So never get yourself, don't fall into a silo on this. Work with other functions, because when you talk about generating business value, we can't do it alone in the supply chain. We need to have a very strong working relationship with marketing, with sales, with R&D, and D, and so on. And we do it together, we do it collectively. A number of times I have seen, in fact, I myself can relate back to many, many years ago where I felt I was falling into a silo of supply chain excellence rather than business excellence. I think that is one thing which all supply chain professionals, I would really call on them to understand that whatever actions you're doing, how is it going to add business value? Ultimately, a business is about three simple things: top line growth, profitability growth, and cash generation. And you have to be very clear which one of these three am I impacting through the actions that I'm doing. The second one is around leadership, and you mentioned about authentic leadership in earlier in our conversation, and I would really emphasize that. And the reason I emphasize that in the supply chain, usually the maximum number of people in a company will be sitting in the supply chain, as in our case, because of the factories, because of, if you have agriculture, because of agriculture, and so on. So I think the leadership role that we all have in operations is super important and crucial to how we are able to achieve our results and perform relative to any other function in a company like ours. Yeah. So if you have 50,000 people, it is extremely important for the leader to be able to, and leader doesn't mean just somebody in my position, but it goes down the line. Anybody who is managing people, it may even be a line supervisor in a factory. Yeah. Is to how do you establish your brand of leadership with your people so that you inspire rather than push. So it's very often, when people talk about leadership, they talk about senior executives and what is their philosophy and all that. But in operations, it's something which goes down to a grassroots level. So your ability as a supply chain professional to deploy that leadership brilliance deep down in the organization is ultimately what creates success.
Thank you, Vikram. And as they say, repetition is the mother of all learning. So, and you've given some new nuances today. But overall, I greatly appreciate this sharing session. We covered a lot of ground. This is almost been an encyclopedia, really, of the different, different aspects and ways in which supply chain can add value. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for the sharing session, and keep doing a great job with Danone.
Thank you, Radu.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help you.